prepared. Montreal, the everyday and the extraordinary. The Elias Macco Show on CJAD 800.
Trudy sitting in as Elias's parental leave continues. We are looking now at surveillance pricing. I think a lot of us have suspected for a long time in various kinds of online shopping that surveillance pricing was in force. You know, you shop often online at this particular site. The site gets to know you. All of a sudden, the prices are higher than you expected, and maybe it's because you seem to be really fond of that item, and you know the algorithm figures you're going to pay more. Well, Toronto's Mayor Olivia Chow is concerned about this happening in online shopping for groceries. So she's putting forward a motion at the municipal level to stop the practice of surveillance pricing for food items. Here to tell us more about how surveillance pricing would work or does work in the food area and the effects it might have on the family budget, we welcome back the food professor, Sylvain Charlebois, senior director at the Agri-Food Analytics Lab and a visiting scholar at McGill University. Professor Charlebois, welcome back.
Well, thank you.
Surveillance pricing as it works in the grocery shopping. I've always suspected this is going on with, for example, shopping for vacations or that type of stuff. Do we have evidence it's going on in Canada in shopping for groceries?
Not physically. Now, online, it may be a different story, but we still don't have evidence that it's happening online either. Unlike the U.S., for example, we've seen some cases where the same people buying the same products at the same time from the same location will get different prices. And that's what we're talking about here. Based on your algorithms, your digital identity, if you will, you will either be discriminated against or you will get an advantage over other people just because of where you live, how much you make, how many cars you have, etc. And so I'm not sure Canada would be in a better place if we were to see some of these practices occurring, which is probably why this issue is being politicized. And frankly, I think to see governments getting ahead of this is not a wrong idea. I mean, I think it's desirable to see some governments looking into this right now before it's too late.
I assume most people would arrive at the conclusion that I have arrived at, and that it would never work in our favor. It would never say, oh, you really like this product. Here, I'm going to give you 10% off this week because you've bought it 4 weeks in a row. It would work the other way around. Oh, you seem to really depend on this product. I'm going to rook you an additional 10% or 15 or 20. That's the assumption, isn't it?
Well, yeah, because, I mean, at the very beginning, I remember the concept of surge pricing being thrown around. Of course, if something is in demand, prices would skyrocket. I actually see it a little bit differently. I see a more intellectual marketplace, a more informed marketplace, and frankly, a more strategic consumer. Because we often think about AI as being something, a black box, giving more power to the seller, the merchant, but I do see AI democratize the market, giving more information to the consumer. Let me give you an example. If you're in a store looking at carrots, you're not sure exactly how carrots are going for, like right now. In real time, you could actually get an app or some information on your phone as you stand right next to carrots telling you, well, you know what? That's a good deal. That's not a good deal because of this, because of that. You can get cheaper carrots somewhere else. But it will take you 5-10 minutes more, and it will cost you that much gas to get there, sort of thing. And so I do think that AI can empower both sides of the equation here.
Yeah, I suppose that because that's just like someone going through the Publisac, or what is now called the radar, with all the flyers in it. I do that every week. I go through the groceries flyers and the pharmacy flyers, and I look for deals and decide where I'm going to shop. So it's like comparison shopping. It's just quicker and faster. I do believe, though, that there is an element of discrimination there, because not everybody has, first of all, the wherewithal to have a smartphone and access to that type of thing. They're not maybe tuned in to the availability of that type of analysis. I just feel there would be a downside, that it wouldn't be very democratic.
No, but based on what we know, based on our experience, I mean, we tend to rely on the past, basically as shoppers. But I think the market is going to become way more dynamic, and like I said, we're already seeing apps giving more information to consumers, and I'm thinking of, say, Gopher, or even the AI recipe book, where you can actually download an app and it will tell you right now, if you're into clam chowder, for example, it will give you right now best prices for all your ingredients you need to make a clam chowder at home from your neighborhood. And so I do think that information will become way more granular. The radar, or all of the stuff we get at home and all the information thrown at us, is, well, good, but it's not going to be as dynamic or as granular. I do think that more and more consumers will go after information, and that information will actually be there for us to analyze in real time as we shop.
Given that, in other words, consumers can arm themselves, right, to make themselves better so they don't get taken advantage of. How do you think government should proceed? You said that you weren't, you were kind of happy that the government's trying to get ahead of this. How do you think they should proceed on the question of surveillance pricing, specifically for groceries?
Well, I think it boils down to who you are digitally, basically, because I do think the government hasn't really looked into digital identities, and that's where things can go wrong. And of course, the difference between airline tickets and hotels and food is that you need food to survive, and so that's why I don't think I believe most of your listeners wouldn't have a problem seeing someone paying more for the same seat on a flight just because they were last minute. I actually do think that most people wouldn't have a problem with that. But when it comes to food, stakes are much higher. It's about survival. And so you absolutely want to make sure that food is affordable for everyone equally and people have the same kind of choice. So you would want, as government, you would want to make sure that people have access to as much information as possible, and also make sure that people aren't discriminated against. And that's harder to prove, of course, but you also need to surveil that.
Yeah, and I guess that would be the digital equivalent of secret shoppers. You'd have people whose job it was to try and buy certain things from different, and check prices. So would you favor,
similar to Measurement Canada? Its mandate is to measure, say, the accuracy of scales in stores, and we know there are some issues there. And so you want to make sure that l'Office de la protection du consommateur, for example, in Quebec, is well tooled to surveil some of these things.
So you'd favor a ban if it came along with some way of making sure that the companies were being honest about this?
Absolutely. If someone buys the same product at the same time, but at a different price, I would say we need to investigate. And of course, right now we have seen no evidence of this happening, but you never know, especially online, like with DoorDash but again, with DoorDash and Uber Eats, price elasticity is pretty high. A lot of people are willing to pay way more for convenience. But I'm certainly concerned about in-store physical shopping. That's when things can go awry.
Sylvain Charlebois, thank you very much for sharing your insights on this.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Sylvain Charlebois, the food professor, senior director at the Agri-Food Analytics Lab, and he's a visiting scholar at McGill University.
You've heard the chaos. Now you can see it. Oh my God. Watch all your favorite podcasts from start to finish right inside the free iHeartRadio app.
Gets the blood going, huh?
Catch every laugh and eye roll on shows like the Tom Green Farmcast and Park the Bus. Now with full video.
We're building a ramp for Tony Hawk.
It's the same hosts and the same chemistry with all the hilarious moments you've been missing right on your screen.
Cheers.
Open the free iHeartRadio app, search video podcasts, and tap watch.
Debate, interviews, and breaking news. The Elias Macco Show. News Talk Radio, CJAD 800.
We're talking AI again. We touched on it a little bit earlier in the broadcast, and we're bringing it back now in the context of mental health support. 1 in 10 Canadians, according to the Canadian Mental Health Association, say they are turning to artificial intelligence for mental health support. Some psychologists see some benefits to this for certain things in the scope of mental health care, including emotional support, practicing coping strategies, or just having extra resources you can lean on if you can't get an appointment with a specialist. We welcome to CJAD 800 a psychologist at St. Mary's Hospital Center, crisis team psychologist, who herself is starting to incorporate AI into some elements of care. Dr. Vanessa Delisle, thanks for joining us on CJAD 800.
Thanks for having me.
So I think many Canadians who are suspicious of AI and the growing reliance on AI in so many aspects of our lives would be suspicious about it providing mental health care, especially since there's been a lot of talk about how AI basically tells you what you want to hear and reinforces things that maybe things shouldn't be reinforced. How do you see the use of AI in mental health care?
So I definitely don't see it as making decisions for me. So it's not going to provide the mental health care in my place, but I see it as a supportive element. So those who are skeptical for the reasons that you stated, that is completely understandable and actually very appropriate. And when I work with my clients, I really try to talk them through, the myths, the truth, all of that stuff on using AI. But I personally find that it can be a really helpful adjunct in between sessions when clients know how to use it properly.
So tell us more about how to use it properly. First of all, your clients who are coming to you, how have they been using AI, if at all? And then how do you kind of reorient them?
So I would say that most of the time my clients are going to be using it when they need some quick reassurance or validation. That's probably the most often time I see it. Second with when they need a little bit more information, so some psychoed. So if they're looking at AI and they're going towards it for some psychoeducation, such as what is anxiety, what causes a panic attack, etc., that I'm usually pretty comfortable with. But if they're going towards it for something like reassurance seeking, which is a very normal response in human beings, right? That's where I start to get a little bit more hesitant and try to explain to them how that loop keeps the anxiety ultimately going, and it's actually taking them further away from the goal that they want to be achieving, which is to be able to cope with that anxiety on their own. And I would say also for my crisis patients, AI is probably not what I'm going to be using in moments of crisis. If I am using it, I'm going to be very, very selective on how I'm instructing my patients to use it, such as if we're working on a certain tool or strategy in sessions, such as dialectical behavior therapy tools and so forth, then I'll give them the prompts to enter in, and I'll say limit the contact. I'd rather you have contact with an actual person through a crisis center.
Tell us a little bit more about this loop that can be problematic when people are working at home with AI. What kind of prompts set up that loop that can veer into unproductive territory?
Well, so I think maybe I'll explain this through an example. So something that I'll see often, right, is someone will have anxiety because they'll ask themselves a question, for example, such as, what if my headache is a brain tumor, right? And then they might ask AI for some reassurance, like, could this be cancer? Is this cancer? Does this sound like cancer, right? And then AI has a tendency to provide a very balanced, reassuring response, such as, no, it's probably not that, or look for these symptoms, and then anyone who is being asked to look for certain symptoms will find those symptoms. And so if it's reassuring them, the anxiety is going to decrease, right? And they're going to feel better. But the problem there is that they're not actually going to learn that that anxiety would have subsided anyways, and more importantly, that they can cope with that uncertainty. So their brain's going to learn, actually, the reason I'm feeling better is because I got that reassurance, and I need to keep getting that reassurance. And then it's actually going to make anxiety spiral and get bigger over time. And
no coping strategies learned?
None whatsoever, right? Literally just talking back and forth with someone, and I put someone in quotations there, right, who's giving you a little bit of reassurance, or on the flip side, maybe telling you some stuff that's making you spiral even more and making you ask it more questions, but there's no coping strategies whatsoever. Very rarely will I have, an AI, a chatbot say, it sounds like you're anxious right now. Why don't we do some grounding exercises, and maybe you can write this down and check in with your therapist at your next appointment.
Which would be helpful, but would not perpetuate the engagement, which is what AI is designed to do, is to perpetuate the engagement. Have you ever come up up against patients who have grown overly dependent on interacting with AI, and you've really had a tough time kind of getting them away from that?
A little bit. I would say probably, if I were to reframe that a little bit more, I'd say patients who are much more, who think that AI is the resource of all facts. And so because AI said it, it must be true. And then having to undo some of what AI has told them, or kind of reframe it more accurately, and that can be a bit of a challenge sometimes. Yeah.
What would you say to people who notice that they have become, they've started going to AI when they've been not feeling optimal, and they're worried that they're becoming overly reliant, or they're worried that they might not be on a productive path? What are the red flags that say, well, wait a minute, maybe I need to speak to a human being?
Well, first I would say to them, okay, you're human. I would be lying if I said myself I've not had those moments in the middle of the night where I'm like, 1 second, need a little bit of reassurance, right? So you're human. I understand it. I get it. And let's see if we can turn this into something that's a little bit more effective for you, because if you're questioning, you're already starting to think this might not be the most helpful for you. So I would probably encourage them to start asking themselves before they use AI, what's my reason for going to AI? Am I trying to learn something, or I'm really looking for some reassurance to calm me down? And I'm not saying reassurance doesn't have its time and place, but if it's our go-to strategy all the time, it's going to be a bit problematic. And so then I say, and when in doubt, you can reach out to one of us therapists, and we'll help you navigate that. But one of the things I really don't want my patients to feel in session with me is stigmatized for using it or ashamed for using it, because so human, and we're all doing it.
Yeah, and as you say, it's sometimes is middle of the night, so you're not going to be wanting to ring your therapist at 3 a.m. saying I'm having an existential crisis.
And I would say also to that, a lot of clients, I'll want them, for example, for the clients who are struggling with suicidal ideation and behaviors, I'll want them to contact a crisis line. But that can be really intimidating because there's another person on the other end of that. And that's oftentimes in some ways what they're trying to avoid, right? The possible judgment or whatnot. So what I'll do in those cases is I'll practice calling crisis lines with them so that they get, like in session, so they get an idea of how that call goes, they can expect, etc. So I try to make that not as new and intimidating, so they'll be more likely to turn to it in moments of crisis.
I'm glad to hear you're doing kind of role play with that, because we've talked about how especially younger generations have an allergy to talking on the phone to anybody. Never mind, grandma. They don't just or Hydro-Quebec. They don't want to talk to anybody on the telephone. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we'll do a lot of that role playing. And I have to say, I have many clients who will go on that in the middle of the night, type in all their deepest, darkest, most vulnerable thoughts. And when they're willing to share that with me, I say, you know what? You wrote it out. Let's make use of it. So if they're willing, I have them bring it into session and we kind of look at it together, unpack it together. We'll go, okay, this is information that we can work on. This is information, I'll really help them triage that. I think it's fabulous. I'm really for this tool's here. Let's see how we can use it in a safe and appropriate way.
Dr. Vanessa Delisle, thank you very much for speaking to us. Dr. Vanessa Delisle, crisis team psychologist at St. Mary's Hospital Centre. After the 10:30 update, we will be talking about e-scooters. We did a segment yesterday. Was it yesterday? When were we talking about that on the Big Five? About where e-scooters and other motorized things like e-bikes belong on our roadways. Do they belong on the bike path with the cyclists? Do they belong on the sidewalk with the pedestrians? Do they belong in the road with the cars? Well, we'll speak to André Durocher of the CAA-Québec to get his take.
You've heard the chaos. Now you can see it. Oh my God. Watch all your favorite podcasts from start to finish right inside the free iHeartRadio app.
Gets the blood going, huh?
Catch every laugh and eye roll on shows like the Tom Green Farmcast and Park the Bus. Now with full video.
We're building a ramp for Tony Hawk.
It's the same hosts and the same chemistry with all the hilarious moments you've been missing right on your screen.
Cheers.
Open the free iHeartRadio app, search video podcasts, and tap watch.
La SPVM vous souhaite la bienvenue à bord.
Doing his best to get you there on time. This is In Transit on the Elias Macco Show, CJAD 800.
Trudy Mason sitting in for Elias again this week, looking at e-scooters. Now, if you caught the show yesterday, you heard the panel discussing and some of our listeners weighing in on where e-scooters belong. On the roadway with the cars, in bike lanes with the non-motorized cyclists. Do they deserve some space of their own? Should they be on sidewalks? This is becoming a bigger question. We heard earlier this year from the Montreal Children's Hospital about a rise in injuries chalked up to e-scooter use, including by kids who are considered underage for riding them. And then there was the Globe and Mail piece by André Picard this week that says municipalities should take this opportunity, the rise of e-scooters, to rethink the way they look at alternate transportation and start incorporating that thinking into the design of their roads. Here to tell us more about what the CAA-Québec thinks about e-scooters and where they belong on the road is André Durocher. He is the Director of Community Relations and Road Safety for the CAA-Québec. André, good morning.
Good morning, Trudy.
Where does the CAA-Québec think e-scooters belong?
Well, it's hard to say at the moment, and the reason is very simple. What we've seen in the past couple of years, we've seen a multiplication of various motorized ways to get around, what we call micro-mobility, which is in itself a good news. The problem is, when you look at the way our cities are built, essentially you either have, the roads, the sidewalks, or the bicycle paths. But yet, since then, you have, the scooters, the electric skateboards, you've got electric wheelchairs, you've got bicycles that are motorized and everything, and yet you still only have 3 paths. So I remember just last year I was panelist with people from the Société d'assurance automobile du Québec, and they were asking me the same question. I said, I think the challenge in the next decade is going to be how do we regulate and we manage this coexistence? Because it's a problem, it's a nice problem. However, it's a bit of a headache. Just to give you an example, there are municipalities, for example, when that will allow a scooter on a bicycle path and the other one will not. There's no uniformity in terms of regulation. Also, what you do out, there's something about how much regulation do you put, where does it become too much, and when is it not enough? Because it's very complicated at the moment for parents, for example, to know, what does my kid need in order to go on the electric scooter? The law is relatively simple. They put it 14 years old, you have to wear a helmet. There's a maximum speed that's authorized. But the problem is, if you buy it from outside, it can even go faster. And, even though the maximum speed is 25 kilometers, I think anybody will agree that if you run into somebody at 25 kilometers an hour on one of those, you could cause serious injuries.
I think one of the other complications, too, is that nobody wants to share. Pedestrians certainly do not want any type of a motorized conveyance on a sidewalk. A lot of cyclists are not hot on sharing bike paths with e-scooters, even e-bikes or motorized mobility scooters. So, and drivers, of course, we want the road all to ourselves, right? That's the way it goes.
You mentioned it. It reminds me, what you just said reminds me of a call I had a couple of years ago when I was responsible for road safety in Montreal Police, and somebody was complaining because there was people like with electrical wheelchairs. And they were saying, well, we don't want them in the sidewalk, and then we don't want them in the street. And so, okay, where do we put them? So we do have to manage the coexistence, but also what we have to do, I believe, is educate. I'll give you a good example. I live in the suburbs, and I had a strange situation. I saw an argument between two people. It was a mother with her kid in a baby carriage that was walking on the bicycle path. And, complaining about somebody on a scooter and the thing, but you know what? As a pedestrian, you have no business in the bicycle path either, as it stands right now. So it's a question of educating. I'm sure people don't know. I'm sure the person complaining about that didn't even know that she was not allowed on the bicycle path. And sometimes you have the opposite. You got cyclists on the sidewalk, which should not be on the sidewalk. So I think the challenge, and I sit on various provincial committees to take a look at some of these things. Okay, how do we do it? And I always say it is very complex to make it simple, because on one hand, you have to make sure you have to have a certain type of, I would say, regulation or legislation so that it's not the Far West. But on the other hand, are you going to request a driver's license? Are you going to request them to register them? So where do you get, I would say, the proper balance? And that sounds very often easier than it is to be done. This is why there's a lot of people thinking about this at the moment. How do we deal with this situation? Because what you don't want to do is regulate on a piece by, for example, you would not want a municipality to say, okay, over here, this is what it is, and in another one, something else. Imagine if, let's say, in the Law des Homos, you had the regulation that said there were allowed bicycle paths, but in Kirkland next door, they were not. So you have to have a certain uniformity.
There's also, I think, the question of enforcement. And as a former police officer, I'm sure you fielded questions about this too, like that kid isn't wearing a helmet, or cyclists in Quebec, they're not obliged to wear helmets. So, he's speeding on the bike path on his bicycle. Why aren't police enforcing these rules? What is the impediment to enforcement of what few confusing rules we have?
It's there are, and I mentioned before, sometimes it's one thing to have certain regulations, but if you're going to have regulations, you have to have the means, and it has to be logical to enforce. Like, for example, on bicycle paths, there are certain bicycle paths where there's a speeding limit. I haven't seen any radar operations on bicycle paths, because then again, also it becomes very hard because does that mean that your bicycle would have to be equipped with a speedometer? So it's hard. So it sounds very often easier said than done. And also one thing that we need to do, and I remember when all these types of micromobility started popping up, I was still at road safety with Montreal Police, police officers would call us and say, listen, I've got this kid on a skateboard. Is he allowed? Is he not allowed? And it was so complex. I would have to call at the SAAQ and get a briefing from the engineers. So everybody's trying to do something. I think we all agree on the general principle that it's a good way of getting around. But on the other hand, it's also a bit of a nightmare, because if you say you're not allowed, okay, how do you enforce it? Are the rules clear? And so I think before we do any of that, I think there has to be a serious campaign in terms of education. I was reading in some of the articles regarding that. Somebody was saying, where are the parents? I mean, I see it myself. Sometimes you got two kids on a scooter, both on their phone, on an electric scooter. I mean, that's an accident waiting to happen.
Yeah, it's hair-raising what you see sometimes. Let me ask you about something else, André, while I've got you on the line. A lot of concern about the death toll already so far in the construction holiday. A number of fatal accidents, including that one that killed a mother and dad and one of their two kids. They were really heartbreaking stuff. Yeah. Is the CAA-Québec eyeing this with alarm so early on in the construction holiday? This total? Yeah,
because I would say, what is it going to take for people to understand? Because I know that very often when there are tragedies like that, and very often they happen in regions, and then somebody will come up and say, yeah, but the road is unsafe. I agree, and I think we all agree that our roads could be in much better condition in the province of Quebec. But with that being said, and having been at the head of the accident investigation unit for many years, 99.999% of collisions are the result of human behavior. They're not a result of the road. So that people, I was reading in the paper this morning that there's been 2 people intercepted last night going over 160 kilometers an hour, and Laval police, a case where they intercepted a 21-year-old at 208 kilometers. I mean, what is it that people don't understand?
Yeah, it's idiotic.
Yeah, it's totally idiotic. And it's all, and the saddest thing about it, it's already sad that lives are being lost, but the saddest thing is that these situations could be avoided, because what are its 3 main causes? Speeding, distraction, and alcohol. Speeding, well, nobody says you have to speed. Alcohol, you don't consume, you don't drive. And distractions, driving a vehicle is a full-time job, because not only must you drive it, but also you have to anticipate what others may or may not do on the road. This is why I always say we should concentrate on driving and nothing else.
André Durocher, thank you very much for the timely reminder and the information you shared. I appreciate that, André.
Always a pleasure. Have a nice summer.
André Durocher, Director of Community Relations and Road Safety for CAA-Québec.
Hey, I'm Ruby Carr, the host of the podcast Encore. Check out our brand new episodes featuring music from the show that everyone is reheating as we speak, Heated Rivalry. Join me as I go behind the songs that brought Shane and Elia together. I'll tell you the stories of Feist, My Moon, My Man, Wolf Parade's I'll Believe in Anything, and Tattoo's All the Things She Said, and how they all became a part of this global phenomenon. Stream Encore on iHeartRadio, Crave, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Debate, interviews, and breaking news. The Elias Macco Show. News Talk Radio, CJAD 800.
You have probably seen or heard this viral video featuring a 24-year-old Montreal man showing him tossing around some really vile insults toward police officers, verbally insulting, making terrible misogynistic remarks, talking about making a female cop his slave, that kind of stuff. Well, after he put these things up online, he has found himself charged with 3 counts of defamatory libel. So a number of jurisdictions have decided that you shouldn't go around insulting police officers. And if you do, it's, you're going to get a ticket for doing that. A couple of cities here in Quebec have done that. And Montreal's mayor has indicated that respect for police officers is non-negotiable. And the city is looking at something similar. Defense lawyers are taking a look at this and saying this is something new, the way the Crown has decided to proceed proceed in this case. To tell us more about that, we welcome Eric Sutton, criminal defense attorney. Eric, good morning.
Good morning.
So how is this a change, this charge of publishing defamatory statements against this individual?
Well, the section of the criminal code that he's being charged under has been around really forever, since time immemorial, but it's rarely used. In my many years of practice, I've never seen someone charged with publishing defamatory libel. Normally it's resolved with civil proceedings, a threat to start a lawsuit, and possibly apologies are made, or there could be damages awarded. But I've never seen an actual criminal prosecution. So this is somewhat of a first, in my opinion, to actually charge someone criminally, knowing as well that in many other jurisdictions, not Montreal, but other cities in Quebec and elsewhere in Canada, they can be ticketed, and that's not a criminal matter; it's a ticket. And so they've certainly taken a rather heavy-handed approach here with this person.
Why do you think they've decided to do that in this case?
Well, I think the prosecution is concerned about just protecting the reputation of the police and getting the message out there that they should be treated with respect. That would be, to me, the justification. The act itself may well fit the definition of defamatory libel, so it's not really unconscionable that they decided to engage in this in a criminal prosecution.
Do you think it played into their decision the fact that this guy was putting his own videos online? This was not a passerby who filmed something and put it up for everyone to see against his will or without his permission. He was putting it up himself to brag. This was basically, he was bragging.
Exactly. I mean, he saw it as great entertainment value, and he may not find the prosecution quite as entertaining. But we have to remind ourselves that it's not what he said to the police officer in question that got him into trouble. It's the fact that he published it. What you say to a police officer would not constitute defamatory libel. It's the fact that you publish it, you put it in the public domain. That's what exposed him to to potential criminal sanctions.
Although what he said was, these were not very nice statements. I would put it closer to almost making a threat, uttering a threat. I would put it closer to that than libeling the officer. It was more of an intimidation attempt.
Well, that's a fair perspective. I mean, it was certainly vile and vulgar. Were I his lawyer, I would probably ask myself and perhaps ask the court whether a reasonable person listening or viewing this would likely think he's a fool and the police officer's just doing her job. And I'm not sure that a court would conclude that this person's good reputation was slandered. They might think if anyone looks foolish, it's him. And for that reason, he could have a defense. It's so over the top that no one would take the accusation seriously. Were I as a lawyer, I would explore that defense.
Ooh, don't give him any ideas. But I don't think this guy has many defenders. Even people who don't particularly like interacting with cops might draw the line at saying to a woman, I could buy you and make you a slave.
Yeah, I hear you, and that's a very fair reflection. Bear in mind that his beef with this officer seems to be that he was constantly being pulled over because he's a young guy of some color, somewhat racialized. I believe he's of Middle Eastern origin, driving an expensive car. And if the officer had no business pulling him over, if he was just unfairly profiled, he might feel he's got grounds to vent his anger in perhaps a a somewhat vulgar way. We don't know why he was. No, we have no information from the police why he was pulled over. Why not?
Yeah,
why was this
I don't know. I don't know if if given the insults, I don't know if I care about his motivation. But here's the question: getting back to that line between free speech, he could have said what he said and just have been done with it, but he didn't. He deliberately rolled video and then put the video online. So.
That's the line he crossed. You're quite right. That is why he is now been arrested and will have a day in court, because he chose to publish what he said, and obviously thought it was would be amusing and get a lot of hits and followers, and he's going to perhaps pay a heavy price for that.
No, he needs a lawyer, so that's way, unless he's getting legal aid, that's something he's going to have to pony up for.
Absolutely.
I suspect, Eric, we will be speaking to you again on this case as it makes its way through the courts.
I'll look forward to it.
Thanks for your time. Eric Sutton is a criminal defense attorney. After the 11 o'clock news, the cost of Mark Carney's realism strategy. When he said at Davos, we have to deal with the world as it is, as opposed to how we would like it to be. Well, a commentator, an analyst, is saying there is a price to that, and we'll dive in. That's coming up.
The newest tracks. Let's go. New music. And the next big thing.
Always on the new music first.
Your first place to hear it all.
'Cause you gon' like it, love it, wanna play it twice. Playing now.
iHeart New Music. Your digital station for brand new drops, fresh finds, and tomorrow's bangers.
I think we need something new.
Discover iHeart New Music. Always fresh, always first. Stream now on the free iHeartRadio app.
Right. You're listening to the Voice of Montreal.
News Talk Radio, CJAD 800.
An iHeart radio station.
Canadian women are looking for more out of themselves, their businesses, their elected leaders, and the world around them.
And that's why we're thrilled to introduce the Honest Talk podcast.
I'm Jennifer Stewart.
And I'm Catherine Clark. And in this podcast, we interview Canada's most inspiring women.
Entrepreneurs, artists, athletes, politicians, and newsmakers, all at different stages of their journey.
So if you're looking to connect, then we hope you'll join us.
Listen to the Honest Talk podcast on iHeartRadio or wherever you listen to your podcasts.